Hey everyone, welcome back. Of course, tonight is Lag BaOmer, the 33rd day of the counting of the Omer, which is a very special day. It is, in fact, one of the most special days in the Chabad calendar, and most yeshiva students love Lag BaOmer. It's a day that usually school is canceled. Well, there's still school, but they go out in the fields, and many of the kids make bows and arrows, and they have field days, and everyone has a lot of fun. In Chabad, in New York, Lag BaOmer was a tremendous day where they would make a parade down Eastern Parkway. This is the main street in Crown Heights, a very large street. And they would make a huge parade with thousands and thousands of people, mostly children, who would parade with different floats next to the Rebbe, and the Rebbe would speak to them. And then they would take the kids to a park, a large park, and they would have games and activities and music and all kinds of things. It was a wonderful, wonderful time. I remember myself going there and helping with the preparations of the parade. I remember one time, the early days, when we made a parade, and we were afraid it was going to rain, and miraculously it never did. So it was really a special day. In the book Hayom Yom, written by the Rebbe, actually according to the teachings of his father-in-law, the previous Rebbe, he writes, Lag BaOmer was one of the Mittler Rebbe's particularly noteworthy festivals. The Mittler Rebbe was the second Lubavitcher Rebbe, Rabbi Dov Ber. It was one of his favorite days. It says, he and the Hasidim would go out into the fields that day, and although he did not wash and break bread, there was no mitzvah of Suda, of a meal, he did partake of strong drink, of liquor, mashka, which he was not allowed to do for health reasons, but he would do it anyways on Lag BaOmer. Many wonders were seen at that time. Most of them involved the blessings of children for childless couples. They got all kinds of blessings for children, to have children on that day. And all year long, people waited for Lag BaOmer. We know that in Israel, in Meron, they have bonfires all over the country, and in Meron, which was the burial place of Rabbi Shimon Bar Yochai, which we'll talk about in a moment, hundreds of thousands of people gathered there, and they had all kinds of gatherings and bonfires and a tremendous celebration that happens over there. So what is Lag BaOmer all about? So Lag BaOmer is about two major people. One was Rabbi Akiva, who lived about 200 years after the destruction of the Second Temple, about the year 200. And his most prized student, Rabbi Shimon Bar Yochai, Rabbi Shimon, the son of Yochai, it's about him as well. What is the story? So we're told that during the times of Rabbi Akiva had 24,000 students. It was his yeshiva was the greatest yeshiva of its time, one of the greatest yeshivas of any time. It was the Harvard of yeshivas, and people really worked hard to get into it, and he only took the best of the best. Rabbi Akiva, of course, was known as a late bloomer. He did not study Torah himself until he was 40 years old. And the story goes that he was sitting once, he was a shepherd. He was sitting by a brook, and he was bemoaning his fate of being an ignoramus when he saw the water of the brook pass over stones. And he noticed that as it did, the stones became soft. We know that stones become softer or become smoother after many years of water passing over them. And he said, how is this possible? Water, which is such a soft thing, which is flowing, can have such an effect over a rock which is so hard. So maybe Torah, which is soft and flowing and compared to water, can have an effect on my brain, which is like a rock, a hard rock. And he decided he's going to go off to study in yeshiva. Well, he went to his wife, Rachel, and he told her about his desire to go and study. Well, his wife supported the idea, and but nevertheless, her father, who was a wealthy man, thought that it was a waste of time, because how much can you study after you have never studied before you're 40 years old? Keep in mind, in those days, people had a shorter life expectancy, and her father, he disapproved of this idea. But Rabbi Akiva was so driven to go and study that off he went. And he studied and studied, and eventually, after 12 years, he accumulated 12,000 students. He thought at this point it was time to go home, so he took all his 12,000 students, and off he went back to his home. And he came to his house, and there he sees his wife having an argument with her father. And her father was saying to her, Rachel, how much studying, how much can he learn in 12 years? He never went to yeshiva as a kid. He never studied. How much can you learn in 12 years? He heard this, and without saying hello, he agreed, and he went back, and he spent another 12 years studying further before he finally came home. He accumulated 24,000 students, we are told. 24,000. And something remarkable happened about these 24,000. A plague came down on them and miraculously killed most of them, practically all of them, killed in this mysterious plague, which only affected them. And the question is, what happened? Well, Rabbi Akiva taught many things. We are told that Rabbi Akiva was one of the greatest teachers of Judaism. There are many stories of Rabbi Akiva that Hashem even told Moshe Rabbeinu that Rabbi Akiva is destined to reveal things that even were not revealed to Moshe, such as on the tops of the letters, the tagim, the crowns on certain letters, which were only revealed to Rabbi Akiva, the reason of that. So Rabbi Akiva, we are told, went into the Pardes, went into the orchard of Torah study, meaning that he delved into the deepest levels of Jewish mysticism, and he came out alive. While others died or became crazy or became heretics, he went in alive and he came out alive. He was a remarkable, remarkable person. So what happened? Why did his students die? Rabbi Akiva's greatest idea, greatest concept that he taught his students was V'ahavta l'recha kamocha, from the Torah, to love your fellow as yourself. That was the thing that he taught. We are told, Amar Rabbi Akiva, V'ahavta l'recha kamocha, Zeh klal gadol, the Torah that he taught. This was the greatest rule of the Torah. The greatest idea of the Torah is to love your neighbor as yourself. What was the problem with Rabbi Akiva's students? They had no respect for each other. They didn't care for each other's learning. How is this possible? If he taught them, V'ahavta l'recha kamocha, why did they have such contempt for each other's learning? And the answer is, each one of them believed that their way of study, their method, was the best way of all. And they felt that the other person's method was wrong. You should follow my way. My way is the correct way to understand God, to understand the Torah. Your way is the incorrect way. And they were motivated by love. Because they loved each other so much, they wanted each other to come along to their way of thinking, because they felt that their way of thinking was the right way of thinking. And in fact, They were motivated by love, but they had no respect for each other's learning. And that was the problem. They may have loved each other tremendously, but they didn't respect each other. Only five students of Rabbi Akiva survived this terrible plague. And the truth is, each one of them had their own style as well. Among them was Rabbi Shimon Bar Yochai. They all had their own style as well. But they survived because they respected each other's style of learning as well. We're told as well in Pirkei Avos that Rabbi Yochanan ben Zakkai also had 5 students. And each one of them had their own way. He asked them, which is the good way which a person shall cleave. And in Pirkei Avos, if you take a look at it in chapter 2, verse 9, Mishnah 9, each one of his 5 students said what the best way is. Have a good eye, have a good name, etc. And each one of them had their own way, but they all respected each other's way as well. So even though they didn't have the same idea, each one of them, but nevertheless they respected each other. Rabbi Akiva's students did not. Why is it that Rabbi Shimon Bar Yochai survived? Because Rabbi Shimon Bar Yochai had a unique a view of Torah learning, but he respected other ways as well. Well, let's talk about that. Rabbi Shimon, so what was his way? What was his ideal in learning? What was his ideal in serving God, in coming close to God? And we are told that Rabbi Shimon, Toraso Umnaso, his Torah, was his livelihood. His whole life was devoted to Torah study. Everything, every part of him was devoted to Torah study. That's how he saw the world. But he recognized the fact that his colleagues did not see it that way exactly, or they didn't follow it his way exactly. And Rabbi Shimon was one of the great Tanaim of the Mishnah, one of the great teachers of the Mishnah. And he had his opinions about the way things should be, but he recognized the fact that there were other opinions as well. Rabbi Shimon, we are told, ran away from the Romans who were pursuing him. The Romans, during this difficult time, during the times of the Bar Kokhba revolution and the wars against the Romans by the Jewish people, so the Romans forbade the study of Torah. And both Rabbi Akiva and Rabbi Shimon fled from the Romans. Rabbi Akiva ultimately was killed by them. We read about him in the martyrology that we read on Yom Kippur during the Avodah service, where we are told that he was wrapped in a Torah scroll and doused in water and then set on fire, so he would die very slowly and very painfully before the crowd. And so he was punished terribly by the Romans for teaching Torah. Rabbi Shimon ran away and was not caught. He and his son Elazar ran to a cave, and a cave in a cliff, and they stayed in that cave for many, many years, 12 years, and there they studied. We are told that they went over the Mishnah, they learned the Mishnah there, and it was there that Rabbi Shimon wrote the Zohar, the holy book of Kabbalah, Jewish mysticism. So they spent their time in this cave. In the cave, they buried themselves up to their neck in dirt, so they would not have to bathe, because there was only a little stream nearby. They drank water from the stream, and there was a carob tree next to their opening of their cave, and that's what they ate for all those 12 years. They reviewed Mishnah, and they studied until finally, at the end of that time, they emerged from the cave. They went out and they overlooked the fields that people were planting. And Reb Shimon's son Elazar looked out at the fields and became very angry and said, "Take a look at the people. They are wasting their time with mundane physical activities such as planting and harvesting, when they should be studying Torah and devoting themselves to godly activities. So his gaze was so strong that he burnt all the fields. Rabbi Shimon looked at him and became very angry at him. And the Mishnah says that Rabbi Leider burnt the fields, but Rabbi Shimon healed them. And he forgave them, and God decreed that they should go back into the cave for another 7 years until finally he should come out of the cave and resume their work in the world. What is that story all about? Rabbi Shimon had a tremendous yearning for godliness, a tremendous feeling of becoming close to God. And we know that in the past, there were many great people who wanted to become close to God, such as Nadav and Avihu, that we just read about last Shabbos in the Torah, Aaron's sons, who had such a yearning, such a desire to come close to godliness, that they offered up a sacrifice that even God himself did not want, and they were burnt alive by this act. Their sin was that they wanted to become close to God, but in a way that God didn't want. They wanted to leave the world, remove themselves from the world. They wanted to become martyrs, holy martyrs. And this was not really the way it's supposed to be. In fact, we are not supposed to martyr ourselves at all, but rather we are supposed to be in the world and act in the world. Well, let's take a look what the Rebbe writes, what the Rebbe says about this. He says that Lag BaOmer is actually the yortzeit of the anniversary of the passing of Rabbi Shimon Bar Yochai, who was the foremost sage of his time. The yortzeit is a very festive occasion. Now, some people fast on a yortzeit and they're sad on a yortzeit, but Chabad, Hasidim, and Sephardic Jews celebrate a yortzeit. They call it a hilula. And a hilula is a very great celebration. Why do we celebrate on the anniversary of someone's passing? Because the soul ascends higher in heaven. All of the good deeds that they did in their lifetime are evaluated and cause the soul of the person to rise higher in heaven. So it's a tremendously happy time. Perhaps that's one of the reasons why the custom is to have bonfires in Israel on Lag BaOmer. The custom has become more popular outside of Israel as well to have bonfires. We'll be having a bonfire this evening, as well as many other communities that really are not Hasidic communities or Sephardic communities, but it's become very popular to have bonfires in celebration of the yortzeit of Rabbi Shimon Bar Yochai. Why a bonfire? Possibly because of a few reasons. First of all, to show the intense fire, the burning in his soul for God. Another reason would be on a yortzeit, you light a yortzeit candle to commemorate the passing of someone. As it says, Ner Hashem Nishmas Adam, the soul of God is the candle of God is the soul of man. So we light a yortzeit candle on a yortzeit. A third reason might be because during the times of Rabbi Shimon, they were running away from the Romans, and they would light bonfires in the countryside to alert their friends that the Romans were coming. So it became a pop, sort of like smoke signals, that type of thing. So it became very popular to make bonfires. The Rebbe says a yortzeit is a joyous time. Particularly, Rabbi Shimon Bar Yochai himself instructed all Jews of all generations to celebrate his yortzeit with great joy, not to mourn him, but to celebrate his yortzeit and celebrate his life. So there are actually these two reasons for celebrating Lag BaOmer namely Rabbi Akiva's students stopped dying on بعומר miraculously. On the 33rd day of the counting of the Omer, they stopped dying, and also Rabbi Shimon's Yortzeit. So we have these two reasons are connected. Rabbi Shimon was one of the five great disciples of Rabbi Akiva, and as a result of it, he was connected very close to the idea of Rabbi Akiva and Rabbi Akiva's students not dying. What was the difference in their service between Rabbi Akiva and Rabbi Shimon? So we are told that Rabbi Akiva taught, as we said, the principle of the Torah of V'ahavta l're'echa kamocha. And this idea of V'ahavta l're'echa kamocha means that we are to show respect and love for each other's learning. But it's precisely because of that fervor that the disciples died, that they had no respect for each other. Rabbi Shimon, on the other hand, recognized the fact that a person, in order to have, to display great love for their fellow, needs to show respect for them as well. And therefore, he emphasized the idea of not leaving the world, but resuming the world. Rabbi Akiva would say that his greatest goal in life was to become a martyr. We know that Rabbi Akiva died, as I mentioned, a tragic, very tragic death. But his whole life was devoted to becoming a martyr, to giving up his life for God. That's how much he loved God. He wished, in fact, to give up his life for God. And at the end, that's exactly what happened to him. Rabbi Shimon, on the other hand, did not believe that. Rabbi Shimon understood that the greatest way to come close to God is by taking the physical world and transforming the physical world into a holy place. Which is interesting because Rabbi Shimon's whole life was Torah study. You would think that someone who was completely devoted to Torah, the study of Torah, the service of Torah and mitzvahs, would want to leave this physical world that limits us from doing that. We wake up in the morning and we're hungry. We need food to eat. We need sleep. We need to take care of our physical body. We need to get married and have children. And all of these things, you would think that somebody like Rabbi Shimon would disdain that, would not want that, because that is a distraction from his Torah study, if he was so great in Torah study. But no, actually Rabbi Shimon understood very well the meaning, the true meaning of study of Torah and the practice of Torah. And that is that Torah is to be practiced in the world, not outside of the world. It's interesting that the Rebbe was one of the greatest Torah scholars in history. He was an immense Torah scholar, knew the entire Talmud by heart, and the codes of Jewish law, and books of Jewish mysticism and Jewish ethics. And the Rebbe was a true tzaddik. He was someone who was very, very close to God. There were many stories about how he would go away for periods of time, not eat, not sleep, and left this world almost in remarkable ways. He would very often go to the grave of his father-in-law, the Ohel in Queens, New York, and he would spend the entire day there on his feet, without eating, without sleeping, for hours on end, until finally at night he would come back to Crown Heights, to the synagogue, and pray mincha, and have something to eat. And he did that very often. The Rebbe fasted many, many times. In fact, before he became Rebbe, in order to marry his wife, his father-in-law told him that he should have certain requirements. Among them was to make a farbrengen, a gathering, every Shabbos Mevarchim, every Shabbos, and we bless a new month. And he should also fast regularly. The previous Rebbe requested that he should fast regularly. And in fact, they would say that the Rebbe very often would fast quite regularly. He did it quietly, no one knew about it, but he did it anyways. So he was very much aloof, very much not in this world. Yet, the Rebbe specifically came out with his Torah mitzvah campaigns, which were emphasizing very much the world, the physical world, and raising up the physical world into a holy place. Mitzvahs such as eating kosher food, and studying Torah, of course, loving your fellow as yourself, giving charity to the poor, and so on, having a mezuzah on your door, physical things which raise us up and make us holy. So the Rebbe recognized very much that the idea was not to leave the world, but to raise up the world and make the world into a better place, the physical world into a better place. Which is an amazing thing if you think about it. Rabbi Shimon Bar Yochai was the founder of Kabbalah. He was the one who wrote the Zohar, the major work of Kabbalah. And you would think that someone who did that would want to leave the world. He'd be so lofty, the idea of Kabbalah and Jewish mysticism. But yet, Rabbi Shimon took these ideas of Kabbalah, which existed before him. They were given to Moses at Mount Sinai along with the rest of the Torah. They were given to Moshe at Mount Sinai. And he disseminated these teachings, even though it was to a select few, but nevertheless the teachings finally became known. The ideas of the Zohar became written down for the first time, until eventually, many centuries later, with the Arizal, Rabbi Yitzchak Luria, they became further disseminated until finally, with the Baal Shem Tov, the founder of the Hasidic movement, they became spread out all over the world. And this was really the ideal of Rabbi Shimon Bar Yochai. It was not to remain in a cave for the rest of his life, but rather to emerge from the cave and to teach the world the secrets of Judaism, the secrets of Torah. This was the ideal. So he says that it was specifically the Rashbi who stressed that it is insufficient to attain a lofty personal level. It's not good enough that you should just be on a lofty level yourself, but one must seek to improve others also, that we should reach out to others. When he and his son, Rabbi Leider, were finally able to leave a cave, the Rebbe says Rabbi Leider was aghast at the low spiritual state of the world. He was on such a lofty plane that he could not accept people's preoccupation with material matters. So whatever he gazed upon burnt. But it says that Rabbi Shimon healed. Rabbi Shimon healed, and he brought the world back. He taught his son that the important thing is to raise up the world and make the world into a better place. Rashbi was on a loftier level than his son, yet he realized that the attainment of such levels should not lead one to spurn the world, but the reverse. It should inspire one to help the world, to bring godliness to those less fortunate. The world cannot be left desolate. That God gave us a special world, and it's our job to raise up the world and make the world into a holy place. And that was really the emphasis. Now, it's interesting that on بعומר we go out and we make bonfires and we celebrate. We sing songs of Rabbi Akiva, and we have marshmallows and hot dogs and field days and sports games and things like that. And you would think, does that make sense? We are celebrating the Yortzeit of one of the holiest, most godly of all people in history, and we should spend the day in very mundane pursuits of sports and field days. We should rather spend the day in deep Torah study. That's perhaps how we should spend the day. But no, we spend the day in very, very mundane pursuits. It's an amazing thing. It's the exact opposite. And why is that? Because when it comes to Torah study, people study in different ways. And there are some people who are smarter than other people. There are some people who are brilliant, brilliant scholars. And there are other people who don't understand very much. All they know is there's a God, God gave the Torah, and he gave mitzvahs, and our job is to do them. And we would think that the lofty Torah scholars would have disdain for the simple folk. And in fact, during the times of the Baal Shem Tov, that's exactly what happened. The Torah scholars of the day looked down on the simple folk, and they had no respect for them. And the simple folk were at a very low spiritual level because they were put down by their teachers and by the rabbis of the time. The Baal Shem Tov came along and said that God loves them very, very much. In many respects, God loves them even more than the Torah scholars because they serve God with purity, with happiness, with simplicity. So perhaps that's why we celebrate بعומר in such a way, because not everybody can sit in yeshiva and study and learn, but everyone can go out in the field and celebrate and sit by a bonfire and sing songs and tell stories. We know that in Hasidic philosophy, stories are very important. They're very, very important. I said before that one time a Melamed, a teacher, came to the Rebbe and for dollars, and the Rebbe asked him, "What do you teach the students?" And he told them Gemara, Chumash, Halacha. And the Rebbe asked him, "Do you tell them stories of tzaddikim?" And he said, "No." And the Rebbe said, "Why not?" And he said, "It's bittul Torah. It's waste of time." And the Rebbe said, "It's not at all a waste of time. It's a very important thing to do because by telling them stories, it will inspire the children to study better, to daven better, to serve God in a much greater way." Stories have that effect on people. And we know by Hasidim, stories are very, very important. There are many stories of Rabbi Nachman of Breslov, stories of the Baal Shem Tov, countless numbers of stories. Hasidim have a custom of on Motzei Shabbos, or Saturday night, after Shabbos, we tell a story of the Baal Shem Tov. There are many, many stories, not just the stories of the Baal Shem Tov, but stories of all tzaddikim. Chabad, we love telling stories of the Rebbeim, the amazing things that happened to them. Why do we tell stories? We should better sit and learn Torah. Because by understanding those stories and listening to those stories, we're inspired. And they really have a great effect on us. So there are many books of stories that are put out by Chabad and by other groups. Beautiful stories of tzaddikim, and Hebrew and English and other languages as well, which really tell tremendous important lessons for us to learn. And tonight, certainly we're going to be telling stories, of course, stories of the Rashbi, of Rabbi Shimon, and what happened to him and his life stories and things like that. We should never forget the idea that if we really, really want to come close to God, we need to raise up the world and make the world into a holy place. And really, this is the lesson of Lag BaOmer, the Rebbe says. The day Rabbi Akiva's students stopped dying, and the Yortzeit of Rabbi Shimon, because Rabbi Shimon's service was the converse of that which caused the students to die. His Yortzeit, when his works attained perfection, is the same day as when Rabbi Akiva's students stopped dying. Rabbi Shimon, who attained that the closest bond with God, demonstrated that true service is not only to bring oneself closer to godliness, but to bring godliness to the world. And that's our job, to bring godliness to the world, not to take the world away and leave, but rather to bring God into the world and raise up the world and make the world into a holy place. The Zohar relates that Rabbi Shimon, on the day of his passing, not only personally reached the loftiest understanding of Torah's secrets, but revealed to his students holy words that were unrevealed until that time. So he was a very, very great man. So the lesson for all of us is clear, that Rabbi Shimon's lesson is that we should devote ourselves to doing mitzvahs in the world, raising up the world, becoming holy. I'd like to encourage you all to take advantage of Lag BaOmer this year. This is the first time in a year that we are being able to leave our house finally, leave the quarantine, go outside and celebrate with others, be together with others. And that itself is a wonderful thing. Last year, in Lag BaOmer, we were stuck at home under quarantine. This year, we are not. We're able to go out, go outside, and the CDC is even telling us that if we're vaccinated, we really don't even have to wear masks if we're outside, not in large crowds. So let's celebrate. I want to wish you all a very happy Lag BaOmer, and God willing, we'll see you all tonight.